Ah, the glory days of Georgia Championship Wrestling, when all the stars would come into the Omni in Atlanta, and they would fight and claw, they would bleed, they would sweat, they would pay the ultimate price to make sure they gave those 10 to 15 to multitudes of thousands of fans so much for their hard-earned money. Because they worked hard for the money, they beat each other up for the money, oh money, 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 and then Ole stiffed him on some money. Allegedly, reportedly, possibly. Bless the WWE Vault channel, because shows like this have been found after being lost for so goddamn long. I'm John Rentham with a retro view of the Omni in Atlanta from August 28, 1983. And it's certainly interesting to see what would end up happening just a few short months later. We would see Starrcade in Greensboro. We would see some of the people on this card, well, one particular tag team and whatever. The whole point is, we would see stars over in the adjoining territory. And then we would see some people here that would be out of mainstream wrestling by later in the decade. Really, I just love time capsules like this. Also, I love the fact there was no commentary. And even if I had to go to Google to find out the names of some of these wrestlers because the audio wasn't all that great because, oh yeah, these were just house shows that were taped, I do love the fact the WWE Vault channel has some of this stuff up. They have one from 84, and I believe one from 87. And this is the most recent one. And it's just really fascinating to see where talents were. They were in the beginning of their career, towards the end of their career, depending on, which talents you're referring to. Paul Ellering was all over this goddamn show, and more on him here in a bit. But I just really love the fact that this event is able to be viewed, and now we can see where some of these talents were in 1983. So I'm going to do some factoids and stuff like that, but really 1983 was a big boom period for professional wrestling. The AWA was rocking and rolling. Granted, they would lose Hogan by the end of this decade, or by the end of this year. They would be out of business by the end of the goddamn decade, pretty much. They'd limp along to 1990, and then they'd officially shut their doors in 1991. And then you just take a look at, the various people on the card here. So let's talk about some of the people on the card. One, I like the fact that they had the interviews in the beginning to hype up the particular matches. Tommy Rich vows revenge on Bill Irwin. Bill Irwin, who, man, I mean, more on him in a little bit, but I never got the appeal of Bill Irwin, that is. Buzz Sawyer then vows revenge on Dick Slater and is on copious amounts of drugs. Reportedly. Probably. I wouldn't be too surprised. And the Road Warriors with the early face paint. I mean, the very early face paint. Like, they had just been put together a little bit before, after Matt Bourne had done stuff with an underage girl. That's pretty much been what, the story was, and why him and Arn were not going to be the top heel tag team, because Matt Bourne was a fucking creep that thankfully died. That's a good thing. I'm glad his daughter's doing well. But anyway, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, they had pre-recorded comments, and they referred to it as a Tex-Tornado match. Ah, those accents, those weird old accents. It was kind of weird to hear Jack Briscoe cut promos. Jerry was the better talker, but Jack was, the great collegiate athlete, the amateur. He was a former NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And then we go to the main card. Well, I mean, there's really no pre-show thing. We go to Mr. Wrestling 1. That was Tim, I believe that was Tim Woods. And we see him against Joe Lightfoot. And referee Nick Patrick is all over this show with a lot of hair. You can Google Mr. Wrestling 1. Mr. Wrestling 2 was Johnny Walker. I mean, there's or Dale Walker, whatever name you want to go with. Unfortunately, both have since passed on. And Mr. Wrestling 1, actually, Tim Woods would have retired by the end of this year. And then he had a business after his career ended. And he was involved in the plane crash, the infamous plane crash that Ric Flair was involved in. And actually was able to save wrestling by finding ways to get, to protect kayfabe, basically, because there were faces and heels on this thing. And really showed the dedication Tim Woods had for professional wrestling. There were full Nelson reversals and knee focus, and yeah, there were a lot of rest holds on this. I mean, I get it. They just had to fight and wrestle, but there were a few too many rest holds on this, and it was a little bit much. So we did get the knee lift, and we got the 3 count, and there we are right there. So that's always a good thing. And then we see what was it, Brett Wayne against Bob Roop. Bob Roop, who, by the way, I mean, he didn't try to steal this territory, but Google what Bob Roop tried to do with, I believe, Roy Shire and other outfits. I think he even tried to do one of the... I can't remember if it was the Fuller's territory or not, but the whole point is Bob Roop is not exactly known as a very nice guy and a very trustworthy guy. He could sort of work by this point, but he was well into his career. Brett Wayne, I can't name much that he did, but it was speed versus power. And Brett got busted open. We got a leg drop for 2 because Bob Roop isn't Hulk Hogan. And we got an inside cradle for 3 as Roop was coming back in the ropes, which was kind of nice. These two fought. It was the young upstart catching the veteran by surprise. So that's fine. Bruno Sammartino Jr., a.k.a. David Sammartino. And oh boy, geez, a prototype for David Flair. This guy might have known the basics, but he couldn't apply them at all. Took on Paul Ellering. Paul Ellering, by the way, who had a really bad knee injury earlier in the decade, had tried to come back, but then hurt it again. It wasn't going to work out for him, and he was still in great shape by this point. That's the thing. He was a manager, but still in great shape. And I'm not saying like he wasn't in great shape by the late 80s, but he didn't need to work out nearly as much. But he was involved in one of the War Games and was still in great shape. And that was a few years later. David Sammartino pretty much sucked. He was pretty goddamn bad. So, we get a press slam and I almost said Paul Heyman. Like Paul Heyman would ever take a press slam. Like anybody could press slam Paul Heyman at this point. But, Ellering leaves and David Sammartino wins via countout. Nobody really liked Ellering and nobody really liked David. So, we get Jack and Jerry Briscoe against the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal in their early face paint and in the very beginning of their time as a team. Now, this has been talked about briefly on the dark side of the ring. Hawk had worked in, I believe, Vancouver for Al Tomko. And Animal had worked as the Road Warrior. But then, basically, the idea is they were going to come back and just do bouncing. But then Ole saw that he needed another team. Ed Sharkey, who was great on that dark side, I did a review of that if you want to check it out, was, says, yep, being in Atlanta next week. And they were in the very beginning, they had actually just been given the National Tag Team Championships. Just say you want them in a tournament. And this is so early that Ellering wasn't even managing them. Like, Ellering would manage them very soon after this. But yeah, and Jack and Jerry Briscoe would actually go on to be part of the first ever Starrcade against Steamboat and Youngblood, which was really nice. I mean, they got to be in front of this big crowd. They had drawn well and everything. They would end up selling their stock, their Georgia stock, to Vince McMahon, which would lead to Black Saturday. And this was actually the highlight of the card so far because it was a Texas Tornado match. And they, so basically it was all 4 in the ring at the same time. And since it was no DQ, you could use anything. But these guys fought and wrestled and did some stuff. And they gassed out the Road Warriors. You could see it about 5 minutes in. Like, energy level just dropped. They were done. And we got some knee targeting. The Briscoes did eventually get some chairs, and they used them. And then the Road Warriors were like, you know what? Fuck this. We're just going to keep our titles. So I guess even though it's a no DQ match, you can lose via countout, which they did. And there you go. But they kept the tag titles. This is actually pretty good. The crowd was definitely into this. Larry Zbyszko took on Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker. It was a national title match, and 2 had stolen the title beforehand, so he came to the ring with it, and he threw it down for Larry to get. Larry got a lot out of playing defense, and actually really is an unsung, star of the 1980s. I mean, really, by the time he got to, 1990 was when he was the AWA champion still, and he got stripped of the title right after jumping to WCW. I mean, he was great. Him and Arn were a pretty good team. And then by, I think, 93, 94, he was pretty much out of, mainstream or he was out of the mainstream spotlight in the ring. He would make sporadic appearances, but he would be known more as a wrestling commentator, New World Order. And 2 was way over here. It ended with a sunset flip, and Larry was using the ropes to get to 3. And then 2 took the title back because he's like, okay, just kicked it. And Larry flew up in the air, did the comedy stuff. That was good. That was some good stuff. And then we get Wildfire Tommy Rich against Bill Irwin, who was fucking rotten. I never got the appeal of Bill Irwin, especially in World Class. He was a fine territory wrestler, I get, but Jesus, I mean, you see him against Brian Pillman in 1989, I believe at the Great American Bash. And Jesus, either Irwin was sandbagging him or he just was dressed like a sandbag or just looked like a sandbag. He looked like a sandbag here, and then he would become the Goon, which he kind of looked like a goon. He looked like a goof. So it's a whipping match. Basically, the idea is whoever gets the victory can tie their opponent to the ring post and boom, boom, whip him and stuff like that. Because Bill Irwin used the whip. It makes sense. So they basically just fought and wrestled. We did get a lot of side headlock action. Tommy bled, and then Bill would get some discoloration, stuff like that. It really wasn't that much to it. We did get an inside cradle for 3. This wasn't bad, despite the fact Bill Irwin was involved. And Tommy Rich tied up Bill and was whipping him. And by the way, this is after Bill had pretty much attacked him. But then got slammed in the corner, tied, and that kind of stuff, and boom, boom. And then the Great Kabuki and Gary Hart show up, and then Ole Anderson and Pez Wadley, which, God, that must have been tough for Ole. Ole with a black man. That must have been tough. Ole versus everyone, as I've said. So then we go right to Pez Wadley versus the Great Kabuki. And if you love nerve holds and Pez Wadley doing whatever the fuck this was, then you're going to love this match, you specific weirdos. Gary tried to interfere, but that only led to a 2 count. Then Ole trips Kabuki. And then Pez Wadley does a diving headbutt, not off the top rope or second rope or anything, but just jumping off and hitting the headbutt, and gets the 3 count. And then the faces celebrate. And then Gary Hart's cutting a promo that's a little bit hard to hear, even if you have headphones. And then Kabuki looks like he's frustrated with Gary Hart because he's like, why didn't you help me? So it looked like he was going to try to beat him down. But then Gary Hart took off his shirt like he's controlling a bowl, and then he put it around him and stuff like that. And Kabuki had the mist on his hands too. And Gary Hart was a very good manager, but I think this is one of those associations that was, by the way, pretty damn good. It was great in World Class. And here, but man, just at this point, Gary actually took a couple bumps, but Kabuki I don't think lasted much longer in the U.S., besides, 88, 89? I mean, I know he made some brief appearances in WWF, but man, oh man. So, Dick Slater took on Buzz Sawyer. You want to talk about 2 pieces of shit in one match. It's a heated feud. This is not like the Lost Battle of Atlanta. Easy for me to say. There were arm ringers and rest holds and a lot of grinding out and everything because Dick Slater did the Nancy Punch stuff and everything. Dick got caught up in the ropes. Dick bled. Dick blood. That was actually how Steamboat's, first pictures were shown. He was Dick Blood. I mean, I know he's Richard Blood, but Dick Blood. Goddamn. So, Nancy punches. Buzz bled because, obviously. And we get a figure 4, and there were knucks introduced during all this fracas. And that was while the referee was down and all this kind of stuff. Dick eventually gets the knucks, hits a punch on Buzz, and gets the cover, but he's got the fists out like this. 1, 2, the ref sees it no, fuck this. So it's a DQ win for Buzz Sawyer. Dick tries to attack him, and then it looks like, okay, he's standing tall, even though he lost. And then Paul Ellering, who's Buzz's manager, and Buzz attack him, hit him with a spike pile driver. And that's the end of the Omni Atlanta event from August 28th, 1983. So I'll be doing more retro review stuff, of things like this and other stuff that's saved on my Watch Later playlist on my YouTube, because I'm trying to like dive into more of the home video stuff, like the March to WrestleMania stuff, the March to SummerSlam, and various other things. It would just be cool to dive into that stuff, because be a better, use of my time than watching this current stuff that's been boring me. Anyway, that was the Omni show from 1983, or the one that's on the Vault channel right now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rittland. Until we enter the Omni again, except it's been demolished since about 97, 98, so it'd be difficult to do. Happy trails to you.